The first speaker doesn't, as everybody always says, and would surely say about him, needs no introduction, Mr. Hooper Dunbar. But this is a man who for 50 years, a half a century, served the senior institutions of the Baha'i community. Now when you see him, you'll have to think he must have started at the age of 4 to have done that, to be able to serve a half a century, 50 years. He served 3 years on the National Spiritual Assembly, which is the National and Governing Council of the Baha'is of Nicaragua. After leaving the United States in 1958, he began that service in 61, and then he served for 5 years on an institution that Baha'is call the Auxiliary Board, a very important appointed institution that uplifts the Baha'i community, that helps the Baha'i community do this work of contributing to the betterment of the world. He did that for 5 years, and then for 5 years he was appointed as a counselor in the whole Western Hemisphere, a counselor of the Baha'i faith for the propagation, the protection of the Baha'i faith. Again, an institution which allows which helps the community move forward and again serve the best interests of humanity. He did that for 5 years before being appointed as one of the founding members of the International Teaching Center in Haifa, Israel, at the Baha'i World Center, a service which he did for 15 years. And then after that, he was elected to the institution which is the head of the Baha'i faith in the entire Baha'i world, the Universal House of Justice, for 22 years. So if you add those years up, it's 50 years of non-stop service to others. An incredible record of service. And any of the young Baha'is or now older Baha'is who maybe served a few years at the Baha'i World Center will also know and remember him well. Hundreds will remember him well for the youth courses that he taught there. He's an author, an artist, and now he's returned to his painting, living in Granite Bay, California, and his paintings are in private collections from New York to London to Hong Kong to Haifa, Israel. They're exhibited in executive suites in New York, in Beijing. One of his paintings was chosen by the prestigious Royal Academy of the Arts Summer Festival in London, England, to be on display there. And his works, he spends his time when he's not out inspiring and encouraging people to do the kind of things which he'll talk about this afternoon. When he's not doing that, he spends his time painting in his studio in Granite Bay, California, and Saragossa, Spain. Would you please welcome Mr. Hooper Dunbar.
احبای عزیز الله اکبر. ببخشید من هیچ فارسی نمیفهمم ازتون. I'm supposed to speak to you in a foreign language today. My goodness, there's so many of you. You know, I've been to Iran 3 times. Obviously before the revolution. And I think this constitutes my 4th visit to Iran. Of those 50 years, I would say at least 48 I was sustained by Persian food. Everywhere I went, the hands of the cause, when I was a board member, they would call ahead and make sure the best food, get him to have the best Persian food. Well, that kind of spoiled me for everything else after that. And in the Holy Land, of course, we had wonderful opportunities to be with so many of the Persian friends. And I had the privilege in '73 of making an extensive pilgrimage to Iran. And I would hear about some of the places I got that previous people didn't get. For instance, they'd stopped William Sears on the road to Sheikh Tabarsi and he had to turn back. But we got through with the different friends that took us there to those places. We went to Maku. I was with Masoud Kamsi, so we went to Cherik because Shoghi Effendi had asked him, have you been to Cherik? And he had to say no, but he said he would go in the future. So we went, kind of hiked in there in a drizzle and a rain and went to that Very, very special spot. And then in Shiraz and Isfahan and Yazd. Actually, I was in Yazd visiting the graves of the martyrs the day that the teaching center announcement came to the Baha'i world. I didn't get it for about 4 days more because they couldn't communicate to Yazd. It was too dangerous to call or to send a telegram. I finally got back to Tehran, and one of the friends said, "Oh, congratulations, you're a counselor." Well, I'd been a counselor for 5 years. I thanked them very much. But then more people came and started to say, "What's going on?" And then I heard Mr. Fatih was trying to get me to hurry up and come to Haifa. So, what? Finally, I saw the message, which my wife had seen, which said that henceforth we would reside in the Holy Land. And she was wondering if that included her or not. She hadn't seen it. Friends, I'm a former House member. So whatever I say here is out of my own heart, out of love for you, and you have to accept it that way. I always tell friends that whenever giving a talk, listen to what I say and compare it with what you know about the teachings. Anybody that you hear speaking, you should do that. Whatever is from the writings, from the teachings, from the messages, always measure up. I prefer you wait till afterwards to tell me about my mistakes, but sometimes in the classes I encourage the youth, if you know it's the opposite of what it says in the writings, then raise your hand, and sometimes I test them on that. So I don't know what kind of a topic they've given me. You must all be great students of the faith. You must have all read the writings. You must have all done the things I'm going to talk about. So I congratulate you ahead of time on that. That's terrific. My goodness. Such a force, you know. You go around and you meet the friends in so many places, and you have to kind of lean on them about, don't forget to say your obligatory prayer. But in a crowd of the inheritors of the spiritual founders of the faith, that's not a problem. And that's the thing that keeps us steady on course. The very simple things that we have in the faith. The application of knowledge really starts by our having this steady spiritual diet, if you will, of obligatory prayers and the greatest name, the individual relationship, the ever closer communion that we should be getting with the central figures of the faith, and through that with our unknown, unseen Creator. While we're busy with the application of the 5-year plans and of the culture and the new culture that the House of Justice has been introducing over the last 15 years, which affects the whole range of our collective activities together, the things we do together in the cause. Nonetheless, we have to remember that we have individual duties and responsibilities independent of the collective responsibilities. And those are the ones assigned by Baha'u'llah to us. Those are his injunctions to immerse ourselves in the ocean of his teachings, for example, and to enter into communion with him through prayers, through daily prayers and activities. Now, there's no need for the House of Justice to be stressing that aspect. They're trying to establish new patterns for our collective activities. But it's our individual relationship with Baha'u'llah and with God that gives us the energy, the strength, the enthusiasm, and frankly, the positive approach to helping with the collective activities of the faith. So if we fail on that side, or if we say, oh, it's so good the youth are teaching the faith, now I don't have to worry about it for me. That's not what the teachings say. The teachings say that all of us should be thinking about teaching all the time. All of us meet souls out in our daily activities, those that are not part of the scheduled activities of the community. We're constantly meeting people. And if somehow we create in ourselves the consciousness of seeking and being alert for waiting souls, we will encounter those individuals that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian specifically says there's a percentage in the population everywhere of waiting souls. When we meet them, we're touched because they're so immediately responsive, and as if they're accusing us to say, well, why didn't you tell me about this before? How is it I haven't heard of this? And so I remember Bill Sears used to say he hoped the friends early in the morning when they pray, they would ask Baha'u'llah to meet waiting souls in the course of the day, to be led to waiting souls. And then give me the good grace to recognize them when I meet them and not dismiss them and say, oh, these people couldn't be interested in the faith because of this or that. I saw a letter from the Guardian. He said that the Baha'is, in drawing closer to the teachings and drawing close to the spirit of the cause, that if they do that, then Baha'u'llah will send them waiting souls. And right now we're in a stage where we're going out and seeking them, but they will come to us if we enhance our own spiritual relationship, if we become closer to that supreme requirement that Abdu'l-Baha puts in the tablets of the divine plan to become incarnate light. My God, so that's the individual job, is to be doing that. Now, of course, by entering into the acts of service and so on, that increases that potential to reach that goal. Fundamentally in the cause, we know this is the day of God, the day of the appearance of two new divine messengers to orient mankind to the will of God, to the purpose of God. And with their coming, we have a terrific wealth of new literature, of holy literature. Now, those of you who are new to the Baha'i teachings, you will probably have heard of the principle of progressive revelation. Baha'is believe that in this cycle from Adam until our present day, we've been receiving messages through messengers of God. And each time the message is greater, it's broader, it's deeper. And that's because the message is adapted to the growing development and receptivity of mankind, and also because we're moving through progressive stages of social organization. In other words, we had a revelation which emphasized the family, and then tribes, and then city-states, and with Islam, nationhood. And now with the Baha'i revelation, the idea of world unity, of the coming together of all the peoples of the world. And of course, that's a central emphasis. Likewise, we received the teachings of these two prophets of God. The last count before I left Haifa of the words of the Bab, the revealed words of the Bab, was 5 million words. And if you add all the holy books, the known holy books of the history of mankind, from as early as we have any recorded history of the spiritual development of mankind, they don't equal 5 million words. So he's revealed the equivalent and more of all of the whole past teachings. And then Baha'u'llah appears on the scene, and we have 6 million words of Baha'u'llah, as many as the Bab plus another million. We have 100 volumes of the collected writings of Baha'u'llah on all aspects of human life, on guidance of every sort. Marvelous things, that some of which are still to be translated. Though, friends, we do have the basic, most important writings translated into English. And in Farsi and Arabic, of course, you have an immense additional rich wealth for the present time. Do you take advantage? Do you read it? Do you review it? You know, Baha'u'llah has said that the verses reveal the meaning of the verses. The broader your knowledge of the texts, the more you begin to make sense out of what they intend, and the greater your wealth, the greater the pearls and treasures you will discover deep in this ocean. immerse yourself in the ocean suggests to me a considerable time a day set aside for reading the Holy Writings. And I found several letters from the Guardian to individuals in the West. And he said that he hoped they would find at least a couple hours a day to study the revealed Word of God. Now, none of us, of course, have that kind of time. Our life is the way things are set up. It's very, very difficult. But it does suggest we have to make an extra effort to read the verses of God, morning and evening, for example. Baha'u'llah says, although he says that's to lift up our wings, Shoghi Effendi tells us to delve painstakingly into each of the texts of the faith in order that our knowledge becomes sound and rooted in the writings of the cause. Interesting, the proofs of the manifestation of God that Baha'u'llah reviews in several tablets, and they've been included in the gleanings. The first proof of the manifestation of God, the messenger of God, is his own being, his own person. That's the greatest impact caused to anyone, is to have met the manifestation of God. And how we see in his own verses, he says, some that attained our physical presence but didn't recognize anything of the spiritual state. And others would be so overwhelmed that they would pass out in the presence of the manifestation. They couldn't. Baha'u'llah himself, they said to catch his eyes was an overwhelming experience. Now, he says that the second proof of the manifestation of God is the revelation of the manifestation of God. And the third proof, which, as you will hear now, reveals the meaning of the second one, the third one is the verses, the meaning of the verses that he's revealed. In other words, the power of revelation, the ability to chant and reveal spontaneously these terrific works of divine import and guidance for mankind, that's the second proof. The third one is actually what the verses say. Well, we can't see the manifestation individually. We can't really witness this power of revelation operating in front of our eyes, although we have some wonderful testimonies from some of the early disciples of the faith that explain that and excite us with what they've seen as these waves of revelation would pour off the manifestation. But we do have the verses revealed. We have the published verses. We have the books. And that's the essence, if you will, of the study of the adventure of Baha'i study, is to go out into that milieu, that complete new universe, that paradise of the divine presence, which he says after the manifestation is no longer with us, the access to the presence of God is the verses of God, the prayers, the revealed words of God. That's where we can meet him and draw nigh unto him, that he might draw nigh unto us. Love me that I may love thee. Same principle. In some of the prayers and also in the Book of Certitude, he talks about how the verses of God are the manna from heaven that was spoken of in the Old Testament. The food that comes down from heaven. And you know, sometimes I used to tell the youth, I say, you say to yourself, well, you don't have any time to read the prayers or just to reflect on the verses or something, as life is so busy. But you know, you never hear anybody saying, oh, I'm so busy that I've given up eating. I've given up lunch. I've given up dinner. Because not very long before you won't do anything if you do that. And I don't know why we think spiritually we can starve ourselves and still move ahead satisfactorily. Transformation of consciousness, the application of what we read and what we study in terms of what's in our brain, so to speak, or in our awareness, our field of awareness. We grow up, as you are quite aware from the principle of the independent investigation of truth, Baha'u'llah warns us about blind imitation. Now, in a community where we have, the majority of you have been perhaps born into the faith, you have this challenge of not simply accepting in a passive way what your parents have passed to you. Each of us has to become a believer in a sense. And this independent investigation of truth applies then within the Baha'i community so that we don't lose our way ourselves and just say, well, I know, I've been raised a Baha'i, I'm a Baha'i Zadeh, I know everything I need to know. No, it isn't that way. Besides that, he calls us to terrific standards of absorbing the writings. The House of Justice in 1982 and republished again a collection of writings about deepening our knowledge of the faith. And in reviewing that subject matter, I think that the requests or the admonitions of the Guardian particularly fall into several successive categories, such as reading. Of course, he says you must read the writings. But then he says you must reread the writings. I can tell you a story because it's about a Westerner. They said that there was a Westerner at the pilgrim table with the Guardian, and he was stressing the importance of the Igan. And he asked if the people had they read the Igan. And the American said, oh, he'd done the Igan. And the Guardian didn't say anything, but the next pilgrim group, he told the story. He said, there was a pilgrim here who said they'd done the Igan. He says, you can never do the Igan, You have to do it over and over and over. And this is something that you see in his letters. Read and reread these major writings of the faith. Then he goes on to talk about the study of it, and he talks about painstaking study and review of the writings. We're talking about our individual era. I'm not proposing that you all go out and make study classes about these things. We've got other activities for the moment, but for ourselves, we need to be doing this. Then he says, after that, he said that after this delving, if you will, into the writings, reading, rereading, delving, we have the digesting. He's called upon digest the contents. You read it, you reread it, then you digest the contents. By the way, I think these instructions apply very well to the messages of the House of Justice. We need to reread and absorb them as well. So this digestion is kind of absorbing the nutrients, if you will, of the divine word. Then he goes on and he challenges us even more. He says that the major works of the faith must be mastered by every individual who wishes to become a competent teacher of the faith. Startling, huh? And finally, he adds the last of them. He says to memorize the writings, memorize characteristic passages. And I think Shoghi Effendi in his writings, he has these small selections from the holy words that are very appropriate to memorize. And of course, then in the Ruhi books now we have a number of times that we're asked to memorize and learn the verses of God so that we have them for ourselves. So this is the kind of a picture of how we need to apply ourselves to these great writings. Of all the books that Shoghi Effendi emphasizes, he stresses the most the Kitab-i-Gan and some answered questions. He said, this is the basis of the philosophical teachings, the fundamental teachings of the cause. And we may think in reading it, some of the things don't apply now or we can't teach other people, but they have a way of changing the way we view religion and the way we view God that is essential in creating in our own beings the capacity to be magnets to attract others. So I suggest, if you haven't been involved with the Igan or some answered questions, that you keep those close to your bed table or wherever it is that you study. Last year, we had the thrill of having the centenary of the travels of Abdu'l-Baha in the Western world. And I'm sure maybe many of you have followed the travels, the details of the travels, and also read the individual talks that Abdu'l-Baha gave day after day. I think we have about 180 of them recorded in Promulgation of Universal Peace. But the scholars that are doing the details everywhere say there were more than 600. We just don't have them written down. Now, if you start going and comparing different books, and if you check the newspapers, then you get you get quite a different picture of the intensity of Abdu'l-Baha's output. Some years ago, back in the early 70s, I had the great pleasure and honor of accompanying the Hand of the Cause, Inakolinga, around a number of South American countries. I was with him for 3 months. And he told me about his pilgrimage when he was a Knight of Baha'u'llah. He'd come from Uganda, and he'd gone as a Knight of Baha'u'llah at the beginning of the World Crusade and opened the Cameroon to the faith. And when he went on pilgrimage, he'd had already about 100 enrollments. And the Guardian was so pleased with that. And you'll be interested to know, he put Inakolinga in the Eastern Pilgrim House. There weren't any Persians there except Lotful Hakim took care. He said Lotful Hakim should take care of Mr. Olinga. But this put the Guardian in a position where in the afternoon, which was his custom, to go and walk with the Persian pilgrims to the shrines, with the Persian men to the shrines, he could then do that alone with Mr. Olinga, which he did. And Mr. Olinga said, he taught me all things. He said he invited me to the master's house in the morning, a couple hours every day, to talk to me. And you could see the hand of Shoghi Effendi just training him. And he said that what he stressed most to me was that I should master the method of Abdu'l-Baha's talks to the public. They could not be surpassed as a model for teaching. And in these days when we're looking for what would be the best way to give the message, and we're trying different things, just have that also in mind. Analyzing. Last year I gave a number of courses on the discourse of Abdu'l-Baha. We talk about there's lots of discourse, but we should also be aware that Abdu'l-Baha had a specific discourse. How did he introduce the principles of the faith? What did he say when he raised the question of the appearance of Baha'u'llah? And put those things together. How do you introduce to a Western audience Baha'u'llah's coming? You know, sometimes Abdu'l-Baha would say, and then Baha'u'llah appeared like the sun on the eastern horizon. When would we ever think to say that in our teaching work? You know, but here's the sample. And he said, why does he say that? He said, because the light of his love went out and transformed individuals in a very divisive society and brought them together into a new community full of vibrancy and life. And he would describe the impact of Baha'u'llah on you, on your ancestors. The content of this discourse can be divided thematically. I found that the most helpful because then you compare. For instance, you make a little notebook, and you've got your computers now. I didn't have when I did this the first time. You put all the passages right across Abdu'l-Baha's all of his trips and his tablets. How does he describe the independent investigation of truth? And why does he say, why is this teaching important? So it's so beautiful. You start seeing what he always said, and then the next stage he'd take with an audience. And when he get a really deep audience, he'd carry it even further, because oftentimes he wouldn't nail it. For instance, at one talk in America, he's talking about the independent investigation of truth. And somehow, you know, I think some of us have thought that means if I find anything truer than the Baha'i faith, well, I'll switch over to it. But when he describes what truth is, he says, and truth is the revealed word of God. That's really what Baha'u'llah is telling us to. Look at the revealed word of God of the different religions, and you'll see that they're all identical in spirit and content. there's one passage where he says that truth is like the water of the seas. It goes all over the earth, and if you check, you'll see it's one body of water. It's all connected, but it has different names in different parts of the world. And those are like the different religions, but they're really all made of the same thing. Well, that's just one example. You can take all kinds of things. What is the oneness of mankind? We talk about oneness of mankind so much. When you look at how does the Master introduce this principle, he starts talking about God and how kind God is and how he has created it and how he has provided for us and how he sustains us and how he does this for everyone on the face of the planet, irrespective of whether they act properly or improperly, whether they're rich or poor, whether they're young or old. The whole planet is receiving the benefits, for example, of his Son that he's created to give life to mankind. And he talks about this, the love of God is like the light of the sun. It shines everywhere. It doesn't look to see what kind of house or what kind of inhabitants are in the house. It shines on everyone equally. That light, he says, is the light we should be reflecting in our dealing with other human beings. It's the result of our love of God that reflects out of us and doesn't judge people. It just loves them. It treats them. It embraces them. And we leave to him. Then he says, the people are like, some are like children. They haven't been trained or they haven't been oriented the right way. But that every one of these souls is a soul created by God. It has an eternal destiny. And this reminds me of another story that the Hand of the Cause, Corinne True, used to say. She took her daughters and went to Haifa in 1909 and visited the Master. And the Master, as they were leaving, he reminded them about this love they should have for everyone. He said, you should see everyone you meet as a letter from your beloved. If you had a letter from someone that was your beloved, your dearly loved one, you would be so anxious to read the contents of the letter. And it wouldn't matter if it had been soiled with tea or if it was dirty or if it was torn or what the state of that envelope and that letter was. You would be looking to see what was written there. And this is the thing in our teaching work. We're addressing the hidden gifts and potentials of another soul, awakening them, and the excitement of having that, start that relationship. Sometimes people are so encouraged if we give them the message with an attitude of love and respect, that they see, that you see things in them that they don't see in themselves. And it begins to awaken this question of faith and hope that the conference here is about. One of the elements, important elements. So important. Shoghi Effendi stressed in his letters in the last years of the crusade, particularly 4 aspects of Baha'i life. The first one was prayer, the second meditation, the third study, and the fourth action. And he spins these in different ways, he sets them forth. And to the pilgrims he would talk about them too. And I know I've seen a number of notes where he said we should pray and meditate like the Persians. Thank you very much. You have to continue to be the example for us of that. And I think we all, as a Westerner, I know what the thrill the first time I heard the prayer chanted, or a soul that went into a reverie as they were praying and the tears going down their face, and gave you an example of what is a state of prayer. How should we feel when we're communing with our Maker? Then he said about the study, he said you should study like the Germans. Nothing casual about that. Both Dr. Grossman and Dr. Muschlegel, I think, had learned Persian and Arabic. I mean, this is incredible. We don't kind of do that in our studies, but we should be thinking of it. And he said the example of the the courses that they prepared, the different things. That was one example. Then he said, and this was, you remember, near the beginning of the World Crusade and through the World Crusade, he said, you should act like the Americans. But I don't think you should act like the Americans. You should act like the American Baha'is that got up when Shoghi Effendi said, get up, and they went out and pioneered all over the world. The majority of the members of the American National Assembly left and went pioneering at that stage, which I think was a thrilling example of action, of the proper kind of action. And Shoghi Effendi is so eager that all these marvelous virgin goals that the Master had mentioned should be conquered during the 10-year crusade. And of course, so many of them were. It took a few, the ones that were behind what at that time were the Iron Curtain. It took a while for those all to get settled, and finally that enabled the house at the centenary of the ascension of Baha'u'llah to place the scroll of honor with all these wonderful Knights of Baha'u'llah names placed on there. And of course, it's a mix of Baha'is from all over the world. It's a marvelous testimony to the response of the Baha'i world to the beloved guardian. I saw early on when I was a new Baha'i, and I've just read it more recently again because I was offering some courses and classes on immortality of the soul. One of the Western friends asked the Master, how can we be more effective teachers of the cause? And the Master said, to teach the cause, you must live the life. Live the life. Live the life. He says 3 times. In order to live the life, you must acquire thirst for spirituality. You must be hungry for the divine bounties. He said, in order to acquire the thirst for spirituality, you should read the holy books, particularly the tablets on life after death. Because then we get this world in its proper position. It's a stage of development to be able to go with everything we need to the next world. And he said, if you do that, as you read these marvelous promises and the picture of the next world, that creates this thirst. And if you have the thirst, then you'll be able to live the life. And if you live the life, you'll be an effective teacher. So this is an interesting cycle. It goes back and forth. So I think it's always good for us to review in our individual and our private studies this subject of immortality. And I find that a lot of the Baha'is have very vague ideas about the next world. Of course, you can't have an exact view of it. And it says in the writings, if you knew what the next world was, you wouldn't stay here, you know. You would, as the lady's doing, cutting her throat down here, you would cut your throat. Who would put up with this? One time there was a woman that asked Abdu'l-Baha about reincarnation. Isn't there a reincarnation? And Abdu'l-Baha looked at her with great love and compassion and said, no merciful God would send a soul to this world twice. You know, the near-death experiences, which there are a number of popular books about these people that have a period of going on to at least feeling independent of their body and moving into another world, and the things that they report are very parallel to the Baha'i teachings on the matter, and surprisingly parallel. I think, John Hatcher has written a book where he's outlined some of those very, very usefully. How we will meet our loved ones when we go to the other side. How we will meet our children that may have died, even in pregnancy. We will find them fully grown and developed in the next world. And the Master says that we will see them. We will associate with the loved ones of God. He says that the sincere believers will be taken into the presence of the manifestation of God. The messengers of God will inquire of that soul that which it has suffered in the path of God. Now, friends, if we haven't suffered very much, it'll be a short interview. But if you've given your whole life, you'll have a lot to share. Right after that, Baha'u'llah says one of the activities in the next world, you will wish to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. Now, you think the events in your life, in the course of your life, you've met certain outstanding Baha'is that shine with the light of the Spirit in a way that not everybody else does, and how meaningful that is to you. As the soul moves away from self and moves towards embracing the reality of the manifestation reflected in them, die in me that I might live in thee, for example, he says, then they become reflective of the unique treasure which each of us is, different from everybody else, of the gifts of God that are inherent in our nature. They asked the master one time, why is it that the glorious souls of the past, all wrote about God in a different way? And he says it's the vision of the soul is individual and has one dominant name of God in each of our characters. Maria Khanum, I think she wrote a play about a local assembly. And there's something about getting 9 individuals who all have individual attributes of God to express, which in the end ends up okay, that you can move forward with something sensible. There's lots of things assemblies can do, and all of them are good. But we oftentimes argue about all the good things because we have our own characters, individual characters. So there's Miss Mercy on the local assembly who's always begging for the assembly, please be merciful and kind to these individuals. And there's another one, Mr. Justice, who wants this. Yes, that's fine to be kind and good, but we have to apply the law of God. Justice requires punishment, and that's their point of view. And another one says, I think we should look for the wisdom in this and try to discover the wisdom, so on and so forth. Now, when we go to the next world, we'll be able to see these souls that'll give us a new facet, if you will, a new cut of the gem of divine reflection. And we'll be thrilled to see that hopefully in our relatives and other friends and those who've been close to. And we will associate with those who, if you will, resonate to the Spirit of God in the same degree that we do. Do you remember the verse from the Hidden Words? He says that like will seek like, and the company of its kind. Now, if you happen to be a kind of secret hypocrite, or you always exaggerate your position in life, you're going to have to spend a little time with the others that do that. It sounds to me like a curative course in how to start seeing yourself in a way that will help you grow in that world. Indeed, he tells us that we progress in that world too. I hear people say, and I can't find it in the teachings, that there's no free will in the next world. But this is a little bit of I think it's a bit, as I understand, a bit of a distortion. There's no progress from degree to degree in the ladder of spiritual stages of the next world by free will. That depends on the mercy of God. But you do have the choice to look into what's happening to your loved ones in this world, to pray for other friends, to go and associate with some of the great souls of the past. We're told that the stages of the soul there, those that are of your level or lesser, you understand and associate with easily. Those that are above you, you don't understand them. But it doesn't say anything about not being able to associate with them. So, we will attain the presence of the prophets. Obviously, they have a higher, entirely different station from us, but we can attain that station. Abdu'l-Baha, talking about this life, he says, this is a mirage. It looks like water in the desert, but there's nothing here to be had of permanent value. He says it's a shadow world. He says that it is a reflection on water. My God. The only thing important, he says, the most important thing is the flame of the soul, the eternal part of us, to keep that safe and to make it burn brighter and to protect it. And then he adds, as he has in several tablets, he's talking about Strange, he says, how I rejoice in your sufferings. Such a different point of view from the world around us. Abdu'l-Baha rejoices because you're having difficulties and tests. Maybe he's not rejoicing in the tests that you've provided for yourself. He's rejoicing in the ones that God is sending you and you're dealing with that are beyond your circumstances. But that's what we get. I think when we pray, for protect me from violent tests, it's protect me from my own stupid acts that produce these tests. Because there are other ones that are the gift, they're considered the gift of God. They're the providence of God. They're the blessing of God. Trials and difficulties that are sent to us to reveal to us shortcomings, make us lean on His mercy, ask for His forgiveness. How can we surpass these shortcomings that we have and be of greater service to others and so on. One of the great characteristics of the souls that have had these near-death experiences when they come back, and my dear wife had one of these while she was in the Holy Land. She had double pneumonia, and she said she was over on the other side, and they said, you can stay, but they said, you can go back if you want. There's still things for you to do, and so she chose to come back. So painful, she said, to come back, because it's so all-fulfilling love, compassion, mercy encompasses you with such a warmth and wonderful feeling. She said you would never want to leave that. But there's a great bounty in coming back and remembering that that's there at the end of the line. And so you're not in a hurry after that. And she said that love tells you, communicates to you something that sticks with you. And I see this written in all these books about these experiences too. That the only thing important is being kind, loving, and helpful to other people. The only thing that has a lasting meaning is touching other hearts. Because that, of course, is, in a sense, is imitating the bounty of God, the blessing of God. In fact, you're the instrument of that. He who serves is nearest to God. He who serves most is nearest to God. And there's a tablet from Abdu'l-Baha, and I think this is so healthy for all of us to remember, especially when Mr. Sabaton talked about the humility at the end of the day. Abdu'l-Baha says, the service of the friends belongs to God, not to them. We see in one of the passages that's also Shoghi Effendi's placed of Baha'u'llah in the Gleanings, he says that all good comes from God and all evil from your own self. That means that if you manage to do something good, it's because you've gotten yourself out of the way enough so that God can act through you and perform some service or some kindness. He says all the love in the world comes from the love of God. Even the pink in the cheeks of young maidens, he says, is coming from the love of God. What a picture you have of this embrace of Baha'u'llah, how he loves us all. Don't miss out on the bounties that he wants you to have. Through this adventure of Baha'i study, through turning back to the writings, through being more regular in prayer, we can increase the intensity of our relationship. And then we will discover more energy, I think, to be able to apply to the plans and actions that we're called upon to perform in the world. We can make a difference then for the future of mankind. And maybe we can go with some feeling of hope to the next world. Ria Khanum says the thing that frightened her most about life was arriving on the other side with regrets, missed opportunities. She used to say that all the time. One time, Shoghi Effendi said to her, do you think because you're my wife that you're safe? He said, your destiny is in your own hand. And friends, if we look at the history of the relatives of the central figures, we realize that that's very, very true. We may come from a distinguished Baha'i family, but we're not living up to it, or we may surpass them by realizing that that's a great I think that's basically what I wanted to say here. Have I shortchanged you? I don't know. Where's the... It's all right, we can go on. You know, I can only imagine that you are a body of people in exile. And you have experienced some of the exile that was the content of the life of the central figures of the faith. And that longing, that having been separated from the land of your love and out here in a wonderful wilderness of Canada, but it is a bit of a wilderness. I think you provide a service of also helping to sustain by keeping in touch with your family and relatives, by having the advantage of having lived in Iran, of having this closeness with the martyrs, with those that are the prisoners that we have. And you have that way of communicating to the other friends. And it enriches our community. I remember when the first persecution started, we were there in the Holy Land and the news was coming. Every day news was coming about Baha'is being killed, the National Assembly disappearing, that this and that. Mr. Fatih Azam every Tuesday morning would, because he was the liaison with Iran, he would, at the prayers with the staff, he would stand up. How often, friends, I'd see him stand up and he'd start to weep. He couldn't tell the news because of the night before what he'd heard. Then it would calm down and then he would communicate it to us. And I realized, you know, the Baha'is in the West had a terrific test through this because they hadn't thought that they had to come to grips with the fact that being Baha'is may mean that you would have to offer your life for the cause. And the example of the Persian Baha'i community and the heroism of those souls so filled the world with new life, and still does. It pulses out when you think of the Yaran and the different souls that are there and what they've suffered. It's a wonderful, rich heritage. And you are the children of all those sacrifices. You are the community of those sacrifices. And I hope you will fulfill your destiny and be able to offer terrific services, even if it's in the life of prayer. You say to yourself, well, I don't speak English. What am I going to do? The prayers are in Persian and Arabic. You don't have to speak English. You can add that pulse of life, even if you're shut in, whatever your condition is. And I hope you'll remember that that has a significance and has a meaning and has an impact on the world, and is both the pleasure of the House of Justice and the object of its prayers for you. Thank you, Vishnu.